what you have to remember that Holmes is hollow, and therefore one has to fill that with an inner life, which of course in Russia they call it Stanislavski, in England we call it becoming, and here I think you call it the method, which is not quite the same thing. And so you invent an inner life. I mean, I know his nurse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know his mother, whom he didn't meet until he was 8. Maybe he caught a fragrance of her scent, the rustle of her skirt, but certainly didn't see her before that. Never touched, apart from being scrubbed by a starched, harsh Victorian nanny.
Of course, Jeremy Brett is talking about the powerful performance that he has created as Sherlock Holmes, in a sense almost becoming this most extraordinary and mythical figure of literature. And yet spending an hour on the desert island with him is the kind of experience that can even change one's life. It's something that I hope you will share with me in this next hour as Jeremy Brett remembers the sweet and painful moments of his life and chooses some recordings he would take with him on a desert island on a program called Desert Island Discs. Robert Aubrey Davis once again on the desert island this morning, and I have the joy of being joined by Mr. Jeremy Brett. Jeremy, your name actually came up on the desert island many years ago when John Hawksworth was here and first starting the acquisition of the rights to do the Sherlock Holmes series. He was obsessed with the idea of you being Sherlock Holmes, although he said you frightened him. Does that ring a bell at all or not?
I think what you mean is that Holmes frightened me.
That could be true also. Well, he actually said that you became so much that character, so much the Holmes character.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that John...
Mm-hmm.
I know John's been... I heard that he'd said that I had become close to playing Holmes and that he didn't recognize me.
Yes. Oh, yes. Exactly.
Me, I mean...
you as Jeremy
yes,
is exactly right. No, absolutely
I think I did hear that.
Yeah.
He's a superb horseman, you know, John Hawksworth.
I didn't know that.
Marvellous horseman and a very, very dear man. One of England's gentlemen.
Yes. And he's a very sweet person. He's always been very kind to us when he's been over here. And, of course, the gifts he's given us have been incomparable, how much they've enriched our television here and public broadcasting.
I always love to hear things about John because they're nearly always good. And good is so much harder to sell than bad.
He actually, I took a tour to England a few years back, and we went to the castle where By the Sword Divided was filmed. And he did a very sweet tour of us, of the actual castle and the grounds, to show how the scenes were set up and how he used the castle and so forth. It was quite a remarkable thing for him to do. You know?
Also upstairs, downstairs, I thought, presenting that, Eileen Atkins and Jean Marsh's brilliant idea, he presented that. And he helped us.
There's so many things to talk about in the world of Sherlock Holmes. I must say, for me, after having talked to Hawksworth, the next thing to come, we had, working here for many years, one of the great Sherlockians, as they're called in America, of all times, who, in fact, did the definitive quilt with one patch for each one of the Holmes stories. And it was at a convention that the first of your series was ever shown in America. Before it was shown on public television, they were shown at the Sherlock Holmes convention here in America. And he came back absolutely raving about how perfect you were as Holmes. You had passed the ultimate test, it seemed to me.
You see, what you must understand, I mustn't listen to this, because I'm still playing it, because I've just been given by the blessing by St. Peter. I mean Peter A. Spina, the head of Mobile, and Granada Studios in England, to complete the canon. So I'm only just over halfway. So you mustn't let me hear these things. But it's very charming all the same.
There's so many things to talk about with Holmes as a person and as a character. It seems, even though we know so much about the interior life of Leopold Bloom, I think we know more about Holmes as people see him and as he had an impact on other individuals, and yet he's still an impossible human being to know, it seems to me.
Well, that's because Doyle's brilliant creation, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's brilliant creation, of course, is on the printed page, and it is not really possible to lift it from the printed page because he's created an artifice of such supreme density in all those superb stories. And, of course, his greatest invention is the relationship between these two men. And I think that we can't begin to question that it is better read. If you're rash enough to try, and many of us have, on about the 2040th, what you have to remember that Holmes is hollow. And therefore one has to fill that with an inner life, which of course in Russia they call it Stanislavski, in England we call it becoming, and here I think you call it the method, which is not quite the same thing. And so you invent an inner life. I mean, I know his nurse. I know his mother.
Yes, no, exactly.
Whom he didn't meet until he was 8. Maybe he caught a fragrance of her scent, the rustle of her skirt, but certainly didn't see her before that. Never touched, apart from being scrubbed by a starched, harsh Victorian nanny. We're talking about 1850, of course. Never met his father till he was 21. He had a brother who was also isolated and lonely, who had donuts, or the equivalent. Fat boy.
Lived in his little club and stayed away from...
Yes, the Diogenes where nobody speaks. I guess that's why, after having had this tragedy at university, whichever one, he saw a beautiful girl across a quadrangle, and his heart leapt. But she never looked at him. So he closed the door on that.
Except, I guess, for that woman.
The woman.
The woman.
The woman. No, Irena Adler from New Jersey
Yes.
was an opera star, and I think he only remembered her because she beat him at his own game. And she had a lovely voice, and he loves music.
I guess it's a natural segue to our first choice, a person with a lovely voice, and you love her music, namely Leontyne Price.
Yes, very much. I once heard her singing this breathtaking aria. I was standing on a hillside in Switzerland, and I heard it for the first time there. I hope you'll love it as much as I do.
Doretta's aria from La Rondine of Puccini, sung superbly by Leontyne Price. Choice number 1 by Desert Island Castaway, Jeremy Brett. Now, you say you were standing in Switzerland, or you were in Switzerland when you heard this?
Yes, I was on holiday with my son David. But coming to my next piece of music, which is a very important piece of music, I'm sure, to many people. This piece of music I first heard in my village in England. I come from the Black Country.
Which is what now?
Coal mining country.
I see.
Warwickshire, Shakespeare country.
Yeah.
And my father used to sometimes play he was a very famous soldier, my father, in 2 world wars. And he once or twice played the bugle. And the beginning notes of the Mozart Requiem, this particular part, remind me of a misty morning with this sound coming across the fields.
The Tuba Mirum from the Mozart Requiem with soloists and Wiener Singverein, Berlin Philharmonic, directed by Herbert von Karajan. Choice number 2 of Desert Island Castaway, Jeremy Brett, a reminder of that misty day in the meadow. Your father, you say he was a famous military man. What exactly?
Well, I mean, he was a poor man, born at an age when you were hurled into war, and all the bright young men of England were killed, as we know, in the First World War.
Yes.
And he once had the great grace to tell me I was so proud of him because he'd won so many medals, what we call in England salad. And he once had the grace to tell me as a child that he only won them because he was so frightened. And I thought that was a wonderful thing to tell me, then and now. But what I think probably was the most extraordinary thing, of course, he was the only one of his generation really to survive that war. So he was quite a lonely man, really. He lost all his friends in the war.
Yeah.
And although he was very famous and a great soldier, decorated, honored, his brother survived. And his brother was a doctor of music and a master of foxhounds, which was an amazing combination.
What was his brother's name?
Dr. Leslie Huggins. He was music master of Radley School and Stowe, Radley where my son went to school, and an amazing man, full of music. And we had a huge drawing room in the country with the grand piano at the end. And when he arrived, I used to drag him to it and make him play, which I'm happy to say he was happy to do. Yes, my whole home was full of music. I had the most wonderful family life. Wonderful. And my mother, of course, Irish, Quaker, amazing combination again.
It certainly is, yes.
From Kilkenny on her father's side, and Cadbury family on her mother's side. And my father with his military background, and Huguenot, of course, originally French, Huggins, which is my real name, but my father was rather alarmed when the family name was going to be brought into disrepute, into something as vulgar as that. No, it wasn't entirely his fault. I was tongue-tied as a child, and my tongue wasn't actually operated on until I was 17. So I think that he was frightened for me. I mean, I had no R sound, no S sound, and I think he was alarmed that I would fail. And so it wasn't entirely his fault. But when I played Hamlet at the Strand Theatre in London, I remember it was 1961. David was 2, my son, and he looked up, my father looked up, and he saw Jeremy Brett in Hamlet. He said, "I think it's time you change your name back." And I said, "Oh, Dad, it's too late." "What do you mean it's too late?" And he came to see the play, and he said, "What a very indecisive person Hamlet is." And I said, "I absolutely agree." He said, "If he'd made up his mind quicker, we could all have had dinner much earlier than this."
Well, where did you get the name Brett from in that case?
The inside of my jacket.
Ah,
My father had my first suit made for me, actually 2, by a tailor called Brett of Warwick, in Warwickshire. Warwickshire, if you put a pin in the centre of the map of England, that's exactly where it is. And so I took the name from there, and it pleased my father. So that was good enough.
that's not too far from Robin Hood country, I guess, from there.
No, indeed, Nottingham's just up the road.
Yeah.
I've just been filming in there, that particular neck of the forest.
I'm glad they kept the forest together. It's a little touristy, but I'm glad they've kept it.
Yes, there's a lot of legend still there.
No, the feeling of it is certainly precise and still there. All right, now Hamlet in 1961. When was the film of My Fair Lady?
Oh, gosh, that's about 2 years on after that.
I
about
see.
63, I think. Yes, I think that was 63. It was a lovely offer. Olivier had offered me the National Theatre, and but he'd offered me the second leads, and I was terribly upset. And he offered me Laertes to someone else's Hamlet, and Cassio to his Othello, and I thought, oh, well, I didn't mind that, but I'd played Cassio elsewhere, so I thought, oh, God. And then suddenly, out of the blue, George Cukor rang me from Hollywood and said, "My Fair Lady." So I flew to Hollywood, and we shot at Warner Brothers for 9 months. And then, of course, all I could dream about was getting back to the National. I had to do other things in the meantime. I did a lovely play with Ingrid Bergman called A Month in the Country by Turgenev,
Yes.
with the great Michael Redgrave. And then I did a film of the Three Musketeers, and then suddenly they beckoned to me again, and I went back to the National Theatre for 4 of the happiest years of my life, working under the greatest man I've ever worked under in my life, Laurence Olivier.
His passing was a great blow to many people. In fact, just before getting on the airplane to lead the procession at Westminster Abbey, I was talking to Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who said, I mean, of course, I would not have known this about him, but that he was actually quite a trickster, quite a practical joker, quite a witty man, and it's a side I just wasn't aware of.
Well, he was also a very great leader. I mean, I'm not sure what he was to Douglas Fairbanks, but to us kids, he was the great hero. Rather like Kenneth Branagh is to the young now.
Yeah, sure.
And he was so full of practicalities. He told me once, "I expect every actor who works with me to have the body of a god and a full orchestra vocally at his beck and call." I think he was about 57 at that time, and he had both.
Yes.
And also, of course, you know, I had the great honor of working with him. I mean, I was Bassanio to his Shylock. Wonderful performance. Thank God that's on film. We've got 1 or 2 on film. We've got Dance of Death in black and white, one of his greatest performances, I believe, I thought. He directed me, as Barone in Love's Labour's Lost.
What sort of a director was he?
Marvellous.
Yeah.
Strict.
Yeah.
Wants everything, of course. The body of a god and the full range of of an orchestra. Why not? Absolutely right. We've just laid him to rest in Poets' Corner just before I came here,
Yes.
which was incredibly moving and touching. Because he's next to Irving and looked down on by Shakespeare, Shelley and Keats. And just in case it gets too chauvinistic, the Bronte sisters.
What does the actual stone say?
Well, there's a very large O.
Ah.
I mean, Olivier
Yes, no,
starts with O.
Yeah, I understand. Yes, yes.
And a bit more. You must go and read it for yourselves.
Yes, I think that's the right thing to do. You were there for 4 years?
4 years.
4 years. And that would take us to really the end of the 60s, I guess, almost.
No, 70s. No, it was 67 when I managed to get back
I see.
to play Orlando in the All Men As You Like It. And then I played Claudio. Oh, such wonderful parts. Ingmar Bergman's brilliant production of Hedda Gabler. I played Tesman. Che Guevara in McCruen's Guevara, which was just after Che's death. Extraordinary experience. Barone, of course, in Love's Labour's Lost. Thrilling time. Thrilling time. But I had to leave because I was absolutely worn out. Not worn out, grey. So I went off to South America and hitchhiked for 6 months.
Where in South America?
All over.
Did you
I went to Che country. I went to Rosario, to his birthplace first. And then I moved through to Bolivia. Went to the carnival in Oruro in Bolivia. And then on to the Inca kingdoms.
Good heavens. Your son was in
Machu
school
Picchu.
at the time, I guess.
He was 14, I think.
Yeah.
And I'd not met my wife then, my second wife. Then I went to Chile, then across the plain to Buenos Aires and up to Rio and back. And I got home and I thought, gosh, they told me I'd never work again if I did this amazing journey. The phone rang and it was John Mortimer, who wrote Rumpel of the Old Bailey.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, Jeremy, we're casting the story of my father's life, A Voyage Around My Father with Alec Guinness. Do you want to play me?"
Good.
And I said, "Yes." He said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Away." He said, "Oh, you had a cold?" And I said, "Yes." So we started rehearsals the following Monday, and that's when I started to work with Alec Guinness, which we ran for 8 months at the Haymarket in 1971.
What sort of fellow is he to work with on stage?
He builds his parts like a mosaic,
Observed bits, pieces of his
polished mosaic.
I see. Fascinating. Well, all right, take us to Carmen and Maria Callas in that case.
Oh, you take us.
I truly can't...
Well, of course, he's my favorite.
Is she really a
Well, I saw 2 productions, those brilliant, famous ones, when she appeared at Covent Garden. And Zeffirelli, of course, who was a great friend of mine, managed to squeeze me in, and I'll never forget them as long as I live. She was not only a superb singer, she was a brilliant actress, as indeed was Tito Gobbi. Yeah. And it was 2 nights I'll never forget as long as I live.
Habanera from Bizet's Carmen, the incomparable Maria Callas, and choice number 3 by Desert Island castaway Jeremy Brett, with whom we have lived until 1971. This, of course, at an extraordinary time, not just theatrically in Great Britain, but also politically on the face of the earth. Where do we go after this hitchhiking journey and acting with Alec Guinness? What's next in your life?
Well, then it was Designed for Living with Vanessa Redgrave, the great Noel Coward play about Troilism. And it was there, unbeknownst to me, that my beloved saw me. I didn't see her, she only saw me on stage. And I asked her once, her name is Joan, by the way, Joni. And
She came just as a regular audience member?
She came to see me in the play.
Uh-huh.
The play.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "It wasn't what you said, darling, it was the way you moved your groin." And I blushed.
Yes?
Anyway, in 1975, I'd just filmed The Rivals and was in the middle of filming School for Scandal, the Sheridan the Congreve.
Yes.
And then we met. And I guess he kind of organized it because I wasn't the only star in the Rivals. There were several others. Anyway, I was the one that was picked. And we met on camera, and she wanted 4 minutes, and we talked for 2.5 hours on camera. And when we got married in 1978, our best man gave us the bits that were cut out as a wedding present. Luckily, we saw them in the dark because we both went bright pink.
That's wonderful.
We had the same birthday,
Oh, real? What day is that?
November 3.
Oh,
And
happy birthday.
nearly. And well, I'm going to be spending it with my mother-in-law, so it'll be very pleasing. And we had this amazing love.
What was her profession that she could?
She created mystery theater.
Good heavens!
She's a milkmaid from Wisconsin with Cherokee blood, which gave her all this added perception and great beauty, of course.
Yes.
And she worked for WGBH. She created mystery, sustained masterpiece theater for 18 years. Created classic theater, Piccadilly Circus. Built a delicate bridge between America and England. And no one else could possibly have done what she achieved.
Delicate and shining, we should note.
I agree. I mean, I can show off about her because I'm so proud of her.
Oh,
And she came, we lived in a lovely house, and she phoned everybody and met everybody and got to know John Mortimer, John Hawksworth. Eventually they would hardly move without ringing her to get her advice. Jeremy Isaacs, all the heads of every television station, they all worshipped her. And I used to say, can we go out to dinner now? She said, no, I've got to deliver 2 letters. There'll be 2 very important people in town, and she had to deliver their speeches to them, which she wrote. And she was dyslexic, so they really got their money's worth. Anyway, we had late dinners, and eventually we got married.
You lived here or there?
Both.
Aha, okay.
And then I had this terrible crisis. I got Sherlock.
Mm-hmm.
And
was she behind this at all, or did John talk
well,
to her?
I don't think she hindered, but I think that it meant that I was locked up in a hotel in the north of England, and we didn't know time was short then. We didn't know that 85, July 4, would be the end of her life. But we had a garden to build, and we were planning this garden. We were too late for children. We were planning this glorious garden. I mean, a huge garden.
Where would it be now?
We hadn't decided. We were looking for the right climate.
I see, okay.
I wanted Los Angeles because I wanted sprinklers and an instant garden. She wanted an older garden. We were talking about, of course, Wisconsin. We were talking about Warwickshire. It was going to be a big garden, for sure.
Right.
A lot of gardens.
Right.
And then she was snatched from me.
What happened?
Well, it was cancer. And it was very quick, mercifully, but, you know, it was a terrible shock. And I remember the last time we danced together was in the Rainbow Room on the top of the Rockefeller Center. It was pink, cherry blossom time. And I was in a pink cherry blossom success on Broadway called Aren't We All? And she was wearing silver and looking absolutely supreme. Delicate, fragile. And but we danced for the last time there. And I lost her. But I have 2 beautiful children as a legacy from her. Caleb and Rebecca. And my son by my first marriage, so no tears, it's all right. But her like will not come again. Believe you me.
Then I assume as we hear the In Paradisum from the Fauré Requiem...
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do, because I remember when I did Man of Action in London, I think in 1977, earlier I think, I dedicated this to the death of my mother, who was killed in a car accident. So, I'll dedicate it to both of them.
May the angels receive thee in paradise. The conclusion to Gabriel Fauré's Requiem with the choir of King's College, Cambridge, and the New Philharmonia Orchestra directed by David Wilcox. Choice number 4 by Desert Island Castaway, Jeremy Brett. Jeremy, we're just looking at some pictures of your beautiful children. You have a chance to see your daughter and son-in-law coming up, I understand.
Yes, I'm off to Boston, and I can meet James and Diana and Christine, my little grandchildren,
Oh.
and my darling Esther, who still rides a bicycle indoors.
Yes, right.
She's 90, my mother-in-law, so that's going to be very pleasing and very happy-making.
Oh, that's
That's next weekend. Then I go to Cleveland and Chicago. It's been an amazing trip. I'm here, of course, as you know, for public television,
Is it? Let me ask you this.
to promote public television.
I ask this so often of Gene Marsh has been Castaway and so many others, but John Hawksworth was rather witty about this sort of rampant Anglophilia. Are you surprised by the American adoration and reverence for the English way, or is it perfectly proper and as it darn well should be?
No, I think another bloody Brit's a bore.
Don't think so.
No, I'm just trying to answer you. I was in Atlanta the other day, and I was desperately trying to find a Georgian to ask about Georgia. And every cab I said, "What part of Georgia are you from?" He said, "I'm from Ethiopia." And I then had dinner at a lovely restaurant. And I said, "What part of Atlanta are you from?" He said, "I'm Welsh." And I began to get desperate to find someone from Georgia. And I had a lovely hat on. I had a black hat on, celebrating the Olympics 1996, with a little tomahawk on one side and the Braves badge on the other. And the most important thing I would like to say is really this. Never ever think that if you lose someone in your life that it's a quick and easy thing to recover. You really must give yourself more time than you can possibly imagine. Don't be surprised if after about 2 or 3 years you're still suddenly finding yourself with tears, and even men cry, you know, pouring down their cheeks in the most extraordinary place, like an elevator or driving the car. Remember, it takes longer than you think. Having said that, I would like to say that I think that possibly we're living in the most exciting time. With the wall down in Germany, the puffball of communism burst, I believe there is going to be peace in our time and our children's time. And I think that President Bush has done it. I think the Gulf War is the peace war to end all world war. God bless America, if this is true. Thank you from all of us elsewhere. Now for my last song, there is a lady who I love very deeply. Her name is Jessie Norman. I have heard her so many times and seen her so many times, and the sound of her voice rings through my heart as no other singer since the early days of Leontine Price. I've asked particularly for Richard Strauss's 4 last songs. God bless you and thank you. Bye-bye.
Associate producer for Desert Island Discs is Juliet Weinstein. Very special thanks for production assistance goes out to Maureen Henley. For the program, this has been your producer and host. I'm Robert Aubrey Davis.